I still remember the scent of pine trees that surrounded us as we pulled up to the cabin. It clung to the air, crisp and grounding, like nature itself was keeping a secret. We were up in Big Bear, a group of 10, celebrating Kyle's 30th birthday. I came with my husband, Jake. We had been married for 4 years, together for 6, and though our relationship had its ups and downs, I thought we were okay, or at least I wanted to believe we were. I don't know when things started to shift between me and Kyle, Jake's best friend since college. Maybe it was those late-night conversations during past gatherings or how Kyle always seemed to notice when I was quiet, pulling me aside to ask if I was all right. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered a little longer than they should have that night by the bonfire. Whatever it was, something snapped into place between us that weekend. It started innocently enough. A few of us stayed behind at the cabin to clean up after dinner while others were down by the lake. Kyle was helping me wash dishes. His sleeves were rolled up, and there was something intimate about how casually we worked side by side. We were joking around, teasing each other about some old college story I had heard 100 times from Jake. At some point, his hand brushed against mine as he reached for a plate. I know, it sounds cliché, but that touch lingered longer than it should have. "You're awfully quiet tonight," he said, glancing at me with those blue eyes that always seemed to look right through people. I shrugged it off, but he didn't drop it. He leaned closer. "Come on, you're not your usual self. What's going on?" I wanted to laugh it off, to change the subject, but the truth was, I felt distant from Jake lately. He'd been buried in work, distracted, and even when we were together, it felt like we were miles apart. I told Kyle a watered-down version of that, nothing too revealing, but enough to explain my mood. "You deserve better than that," he said softly. "You're remarkable, Emily. You know that, right?" Something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight behind them, like he had been holding on to that thought for a long time. I tried to play it off with a joke, but my voice wavered. I could feel the tension building between us like static electricity, and in that moment, I should have walked away. I should have made an excuse, gone to find Jake or the others, but instead, I stayed. Later that night, we all gathered around the fire pit, passing around drinks and sharing stories. The stars were impossibly bright, and the warmth of the flames seemed to blur the lines of reality. Jake sat beside me, his hand resting loosely on my knee, but his attention was elsewhere, probably on some work project he couldn't fully disconnect from. Meanwhile, I felt Kyle's gaze across the fire. Every time I glanced up, he was watching me. Eventually, the party began to thin out. People drifted back to their rooms or passed out on couches. Jake was deep in conversation with someone about sports, completely oblivious to the world around him. I felt restless, like the night had taken on a life of its own, pulling me in a direction I couldn't fully understand. Kyle caught up with me as I slipped away from the group, needing air. We walked together in silence for a while, the sound of our footsteps crunching against the gravel path the only noise between us. We ended up near the edge of the forest, where Jake had parked his car. The moon cast long shadows, illuminating the shiny black paint of the SUV. "You okay?" Kyle asked again, his voice low and cautious. I nodded, but I knew I wasn't. Something inside me was breaking loose, something I had been trying to keep locked away for too long. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," I admitted quietly. "With Jake, with everything." Kyle stepped closer. "You're not alone in that feeling." His words hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't just talking about me. There was something in his eyes, something vulnerable and raw. I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for how badly I wanted to be seen, to be understood, even if it was wrong. Before I could overthink it, he kissed me. It was soft at first, hesitant, as if he was giving me time to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kissed him back, my mind racing with 1,000 conflicting thoughts that blurred together into nothingness. All I knew was the heat between us, the way his hands cradled my face like I was something precious. We stumbled toward the car, the world around us fading into the background. It was reckless, dangerous, and completely out of character for both of us, but in that moment, it felt inevitable. We climbed inside, the leather seats cold against my skin. The windows fogged up quickly as our breaths mingled in the confined space. "Emily," Kyle whispered, his voice strained. "Are you sure?" I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. Time seemed to stand still in that car. It was a haze of sensations, his hands, his mouth, the warmth of his body pressing against mine. Every boundary I thought I had crumbled under the weight of my desire. For a brief, fleeting moment, I forgot about Jake. I forgot about the consequences. All that existed was Kyle and the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. But reality has a cruel way of crashing back in when you least expect it. As we lay there, tangled in each other, I suddenly heard footsteps approaching. My heart froze in my chest. We scrambled to sit up, both of us panicked and breathless. I peeked out the window and saw Jake. He was walking toward the car, his phone in his hand, the screen glowing against the dark night. For a second, I thought maybe he was just taking a late-night call and would walk past us without noticing. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure Kyle could hear it. I held my breath, gripping Kyle's arm as if that would somehow make us invisible. But then Jake stopped right in front of the car. "Shit," Kyle whispered, his voice barely audible. Jake squinted at the vehicle, then tilted his head slightly, as if something didn't add up. I could see the gears turning in his mind. Why was his car fogged up in the middle of the night? Why were the doors unlocked? And why the hell were there two shapes moving inside? "Who's in there?" he called out, stepping closer. Panic shot through me like a lightning bolt. Kyle and I froze, caught like kids who had been sneaking around past curfew. I could hear the gravel crunch under Jake's shoes as he approached the driver's side door. Kyle leaned forward quickly, trying to think on his feet. "Stay quiet," Kyle mouthed to me, but I knew it was too late. Jake was already pulling on the door handle. It didn't open. Thankfully, Kyle had locked it at the last second. Jake rattled the handle again, his voice sharper this time. "Hey! What the hell is going on?" Kyle tried to play it cool, but the tension in his voice was obvious. "Hey, man, it's just me. Chill out." "Kyle?" Jake's voice dropped an octave, laced with confusion. He moved to the window, peering inside. He couldn't see me, yet, but he clearly wasn't expecting his best friend to be sitting in his car at this hour. "Yeah, it's me," Kyle continued, keeping his tone casual. "I just needed to get away from the noise for a bit. You know how those parties get." Jake paused, his brow furrowing. "All right, but why are you in my car?" Kyle chuckled nervously. "Oh, just, needed some privacy to clear my head. The cabin's packed." For a moment, it seemed like Jake was buying it. He stepped back slightly, rubbing the back of his neck like he was processing the weirdness of the situation. I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd dodged the bullet. But then Jake's eyes narrowed, and he pointed toward the fogged windows. "Hold up. Why are the windows like that?" My stomach dropped. There was no good explanation for it, and Kyle knew it too. Jake wasn't stupid. He could sense something was off. He reached for the passenger side door and yanked it open before either of us could react. The cold night air rushed in, and for a second, time seemed to slow down. "Emily?" Jake's voice cracked as he stared at me, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. I saw his face contort as realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He stepped back, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Are you fucking serious right now? His voice rose, trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. In my car? With him? I couldn't find any words. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The guilt, the shame, it crashed over me in waves. Jake's expression shifted from shock to betrayal, his jaw tightening as he tried to process what was happening. Kyle raised his hands defensively. Jake, listen, it's not what you think. Not what I think. Jake cut him off, his voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. You're sitting in my car with my wife, and you have the nerve to tell me it's not what I think? What the hell is wrong with you? Kyle stumbled over his words, but Jake wasn't having it. He turned to me, his eyes burning with anger. And you? How long has this been going on, huh? Is this why you've been so distant lately? Jesus Christ, Emily. Jake, I finally managed to speak, but he cut me off again. Don't. Just don't. He held up a hand, his voice breaking. I trusted you. I trusted both of you. The weight of those words hit me like a freight train. I had never seen Jake like this before, so raw, so completely broken. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, someone he didn't recognize anymore. The worst part was that I couldn't even blame him. I had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and there was no taking it back. Kyle tried again to step in. Jake, man, let's talk about this. It was a mistake. A mistake? Jake laughed bitterly, his eyes flashing with fury. Oh, that's rich. You call sneaking around with my wife a mistake? You were supposed to be my best friend. Kyle hung his head, knowing there was no argument that could justify what we had done. Jake's hands balled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, I thought he might hit him. But instead, he turned away, pacing back and forth as he struggled to contain his emotions. I can't even look at either of you right now, he muttered, his voice barely audible. You know what? Screw this. I'm done. Jake, please, I begged, stepping out of the car. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. It didn't mean anything. I don't even know why it happened. Please, just let me explain. He stopped in his tracks and turned to face me, his eyes full of pain. It didn't mean anything? Wow. That's supposed to make me feel better? I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing I said could undo the damage. Jake took a deep breath, his shoulders heaving as he tried to steady himself. I need space, he said finally. Don't follow me. Don't call me. I can't deal with this right now. With that, he stormed off into the darkness, leaving me and Kyle standing there in silence. The night felt colder than ever, the weight of our actions suffocating. I turned to Kyle, who looked just as shaken as I felt. We fucked up, he whispered, his voice hollow. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. We had crossed a line we could never uncross, and now everything was falling apart around us. The question was, what the hell were we supposed to do next? Kyle and I stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The sound of Jake's footsteps faded into the distance, swallowed by the forest. The silence between us grew heavy, suffocating, and unbearable. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep warm, though I knew it wasn't the cold that was making me shiver. We need to fix this, I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I was saying it to Kyle or myself. Kyle rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. How? He's not going to forgive either of us, Emily. You saw his face. He's done. I shook my head. No. He just needs time. This isn't the end. It can't be. My voice wavered on that last part, betraying the fear clawing at my insides. Deep down, though, I wasn't sure I believed my own words. Kyle leaned against the car, his posture slumped, defeated. We really screwed up. He's been my best friend for years, and now? I don't even know if he'll ever talk to me again. The weight of what we had done pressed down on us like a tidal wave. Memories of the life Jake and I had built together flashed through my mind. Our wedding day, the lazy Sundays spent curled up on the couch, the plans for a future that now felt like they were slipping through my fingers. I thought about all the small moments I had taken for granted and how those moments might never come back. Kyle must have seen the panic in my eyes because he stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. Hey. Don't spiral. We can figure this out. Figure this out? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Kyle, there's no figuring this out. I betrayed my husband. You betrayed your best friend. This isn't something we can just fix overnight. He sighed deeply, dropping his hand. So what do we do? Just walk back to the cabin like nothing happened? Face everyone tomorrow morning and pretend everything's fine? No, I said firmly. I need to talk to Jake. Tonight. I can't let him leave like that, thinking there's no hope. Kyle frowned but nodded. All right. I'll give you space. You two need to have this conversation without me in the way. I appreciated the gesture, but the truth was, I wasn't sure how the conversation would go. Jake wasn't the type to forgive easily, especially not something like this. I knew that if I didn't handle it carefully, I could lose him forever. I found Jake back at the cabin. He was pacing outside near the back porch, his breath visible in the cold night air. He didn't see me at first, and I hesitated before stepping forward. My boots crunched softly on the gravel, and he turned sharply, his eyes narrowing when he saw me. What are you doing here? He asked coldly. There was no warmth in his voice, no trace of the man who used to look at me with love and admiration. I need to talk to you, I said, keeping my voice steady. Please. Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. He crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw tight. For a moment, I thought he might tell me to leave, but then he gave a short, bitter laugh. Fine. You've got 5 minutes. Say whatever you need to say. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Jake, I messed up. I know that. What happened tonight, it was a terrible mistake. I don't have any excuse for it. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am and ask you to give me a chance to make things right. His eyes flashed with anger. A mistake? You keep saying that like it's supposed to mean something. Do you think I'm just going to forget what I saw tonight? You think an apology is enough to erase the fact that you were with him? No, I said quietly. I don't expect you to forget. I know this is going to take time, maybe a long time, but I need you to know that I still love you. I made a horrible, selfish choice, and I hate myself for it. But I love you, Jake. That hasn't changed. He looked away, his shoulders tense. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this in the first place. The truth of his words cut deep, and I had no defense. He was right. Love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. It wasn't supposed to come with betrayal and lies. But here we were, standing in the wreckage of what used to be our life together. I know, I whispered. You have every right to hate me. But please, don't walk away without at least trying to talk this through. We owe each other that much. Jake was silent for a long time. He stared out into the distance, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer but no less strained. I need time, Emily. I can't just forgive you overnight. I need to figure out if I can even trust you again. And honestly, I don't know if I can. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had to stay strong, even if every word he said felt like a dagger to the heart. I understand, I said softly. Take the time you need. I'll be here, waiting, if you decide you want to try. Jake gave a slow, weary nod. I don't know what's going to happen between us, but I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk. Just don't expect too much. It wasn't a promise, but it was something, a small glimmer of hope in the darkness. I nodded and stepped back, giving him space. As I walked away, I realized that this was only the beginning of the road ahead. There were no guarantees, no easy answers. All I could do now was wait and hope that, somehow, we could find a way back to each other. The next morning, the sun rose over the cabin, casting a pale light on the trees and the lake. The party was over, and so was the life I had known. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to rebuild, if we were both willing to fight for it. As the sun rose, I stood by the edge of the lake, watching the world slowly come back to life. Everything was calm, almost deceptively peaceful. It was strange how the universe didn't seem to care that someone's life had just been turned upside down. Jake was inside the cabin somewhere, and Kyle had kept his distance. For now, all I could do was give Jake the time and space he needed. The weight of my actions hung over me, but I knew that moving forward wasn't impossible. It would just take time, patience, and a lot of work. There's no easy way to come back from betrayal, but if I wanted any chance of healing this mess, I had to face it head on. Now, here's the real question. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Do you think Jake and I have any chance at reconciliation, or do you believe trust like that is gone forever once it's broken? Maybe you've been in a situation like this before. If so, I'd love to hear how you dealt with it. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about it. And if you've made it this far, thanks for sticking with me through this story. Your support means everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. You never know what twist the next one might take. See you in the next chapter. Stay safe and take care. Victory Hand.